Have you ever felt like someone at your job was sabotaging you, but was there no way to prove it? If you've been through a situation like this, or feel like you're going through it now, then pay attention, because what I'm going to tell you happened to a subscriber here on the channel, and the way it was all revealed, it will mess with you. Sabotage in the workplace is not the stuff of soap operas. It's real. It is silent. And it happens in the best companies with the best professionals, envious, manipulative, false people who pretends to be your friend, has lunch with you, praises you in front of others, and behind your back prepares the ground to knock you down. This kind of toxic colleague exists, and the worst, often it's closer than you think. This video is not just another outburst, it is a warning. Because today you will understand how a professional betrayal is born, how she disguises herself as friendship, how she hides behind smiles and compliments, and how a single email, which wasn't even supposed to be read, brought it all to light. But let's go back to the beginning. It was an ordinary Tuesday. The routine continued normally. The team was involved in a big demand, which could define the future of the team. Meetings, deadlines, small hallway conversations, nothing out of the standard. That was one of those phases where you feel like things are finally moving. Do you know when you think you're being recognized, that your work is finally being valued, that the climate, despite the pressure, is positive? But that's where the danger lies, because it is precisely at that moment when you let your guard down that the sabotage begins. And it doesn't come with a fuss. It comes between the lines, in a conversation that you were not invited, in a joke that seems innocent, an important task that is suddenly passed on to someone else, and you only realize it later. It was in this climate that the email arrived. An email with the title, "Confidential, Internal Discussion, Please do not pass on." Do you know when the whole body freezes? The person who sent me this story said that at that moment, he didn't know whether to open or ignore it, but curiosity spoke louder, and it was the best, and at the same time, the worst decision I could have made. When he opened the email, he came across an internal conversation between members of his own team, a thread of messages exchanged outside the official group. In one of these messages, one of the leaders proposed something that seemed surreal. Let's vote on his permanence in the current project, discreetly, without exposing too much. If it works, we will communicate it later. The person's name? It was his, the one who was reading. In the email, he was mentioned as someone who could hinder the progress of the team, who was in a difficult posture to deal with, and who perhaps no longer had the profile to continue. But the most shocking thing was yet to come. Right below came the answers, and among them, the name of someone he considered a true friend, the same one who shared coffee during breaks, that I listened to his outbursts, who even gave a ride after work a few times. This friend had voted in favor of his withdrawal from the project, and not only that, in the comment, he suggested that he be quietly relocated to another sector so that it would not affect the climate. Imagine the impact. You are doing your best, working hard, believing that he is building something together with the team, and suddenly you discover that there is a silent articulation to get you out, led by the one you trusted the most. It is at this moment that the ground disappears, because it's not just betrayal that hurts, it is the feeling of powerlessness, of having been deceived for so long, of not having noticed the signs. There, reading that email, everything made sense. The strange looks in the meetings, the dry answers in the group, the distancing from the boss. It was all part of something bigger, a decision made in the shadows, no chance of defense, without even a direct conversation. But calm down, because that's not the end of the story. In fact, what happens after that email is what turns this story into something you need to hear until the end. Because what this guy did, after finding out the whole truth, can change the way you look at the work environment. It can teach you how to protect yourself from saboteurs without having to play their game. It can give you the emotional and strategic control you need to survive and even win in a toxic environment. And that's what we're going to talk about now. The feeling that took over him at that moment was not only anger, it was a kind of frustration that burns inside, a punch in the stomach. The betrayal did not come from someone distant, from a declared disaffection, from a colleague with whom he had already had friction before. No, the author of that backstab was someone he considered a true partner, that kind of colleague with whom you share confidences, exchange career advice, complain about the boss, laugh at everyday situations. They had a routine together. They had lunch at the same restaurant. They joked about who was going to pay the bill. They exchanged confidences about personal problems, including outside of work. In many moments, he opened up to this friend as if he were in front of a brother. And now there, with his eyes still, fixed on the computer screen, all he could think was, how was I so blind? How did I not realize it before? And that's the point. Saboteurs at work don't always look like villains. Sometimes they're just the opposite, sympathetic, helpful, the kind of person who conquers by lip service, who knows how to appear trustworthy. They are experts in creating fake connections, in building an image of an ally just to have access to his weaknesses. Now, looking back, he began to remember signs that seemed small at the time, but that today make perfect sense. Like that time when he commented in a joking tone that the boss thought he was too intense, or when he subtly planted doubt, saying, "Do you really think this project is for you? I don't know, I have the impression that they have their eyes on someone else." Phrases like this were said with a smile, with that air of someone who is just sharing a concern, a friend's warning. But today, he knew all that was part of a well-articulated plan. This colleague played the role of a bridge between the team members. He moved between sectors easily, struck up conversations with everyone. He was the kind of person who always seemed to have a neutral opinion. But now it was clear that behind the scenes, he was the one who fed the gossip, who distorted speech, who made a point of reinforcing the team's insecurities about him. And he did it masterfully, calmly, with the face of a good guy. It was not a direct attack. There were no clashes. It was something much more subtle. That's why it was so dangerous. It is this type of colleague who destroys careers without arousing suspicion, that undermines his image little by little, almost invisibly. And the cruelest? It's just that he can only do this because you surrender the weapons yourself, trusting too much, opening yourself up too much, believing that there is loyalty in environments where, in fact, what exists is competition disguised as collaboration. He began to remember moments that, until then, did not seem suspicious. Like that time the project was changed at the last minute and no one warned him. Or when there was an important meeting and he was excluded from the invitation with the excuse that it was a mistake. The justification was always accompanied by a friendly apology, and often the one who gave this justification was precisely the traitorous colleague, that he was acting as a supporter who said, "Wow, how strange, I'm going to see with the people what happened." It was all calculated, and now it was all there, wide open. The secret ballot, the articulation behind his back, the comments in internal emails. It was as if the pieces of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. And the hardest thing to swallow was the clarity with which everything made sense now. Every false word disguised as advice, each joke that deep down was a disguised criticism, each silence in decisive moments where he expected support and only received indifference. If you've been watching this and you've been through something similar, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The pain is not only professional, it's personal, because the work environment, despite being a space of goals and productivity, is also a place where we create bonds, where we believe in people, where many times we place more trust than we should. This is precisely why betrayal in the professional environment hurts so much, because it breaks not only trust in the person who hurt you, but also in your own judgment, You begin to doubt yourself. He begins to wonder, am I too naive? Did everyone notice except me? And this corrodes. It erodes self-esteem. It erodes motivation. It erodes the will to continue in that place. And the environment doesn't help, because toxic work environments have one thing in common. They protect handlers. Saboteurs know how to adapt. They know how to appear useful, how to maintain the appearance of good employees while silently harming others. And you, who are just trying to do your job honestly, end up being the perfect target. The colleague's mask finally fell, but the emotional damage was already done. It's not easy to deal with the feeling of being betrayed by someone who had access to your vulnerability, and the worst, of having been excluded from a decision that directly involved his name, his function, his value as a professional, a secret ballot, a collusion, and, in the middle of it all, he understood why, for the past few weeks, everything had seemed strange. Because his colleagues were colder, why the praise has decreased, why he was no longer called upon to give his opinion on important decisions. He was being sidelined, weakened little by little until he left without a fuss, as if his departure was just a natural fit of the team. But none of this was natural. It was a strategy, and he was the target, the trusted friend. He was the architect of the fall. And now, with the unvarnished truth before his eyes, he had to decide what to do. If you faced it head-on, you exposed the scheme and ran the risk of seeming paranoid, or if you kept silent and accepted the injustice. But he knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again. And this is where the story begins to change direction, because it was at this very point that he made a decision that many in his place would not have the courage to make. He knew he needed to react. I couldn't pretend that nothing had happened, but before any step he needed to understand what he was really up against. Because now, looking at it with different eyes, he began to see that that sabotage had not started there, with that email. That was just the final chapter of a plan that had been articulated for much longer, a calculated plan, cold, silent. He began to remember every detail, every conversation, every attitude that, at the time, seemed irrelevant, but now gained a different weight. It was like reviewing a movie knowing the ending. You start to see the clues that previously went unnoticed. The first thing that came to mind was the project he would lead. A great job, with internal visibility, which would put his name directly on the board's radar. He had been chosen by the manager himself, but suddenly the idea was shelved. At the time, they said it was due to change of priorities. Today, he knows it wasn't. Someone played against it, and this someone was much closer than he seemed. Then came the memory of a specific meeting. He had presented a bold, well-structured proposal with solid data. The feedback was lukewarm. An uncomfortable silence took over the room. And then, as if he didn't want anything, that colleague smiled and said, "I don't know. Maybe we need someone with more flexibility for this type of delivery." At the time, it seemed like constructive criticism. Today, he understands that it was the first push. This same colleague began to make small remarks to the others, always in an informal tone, always in that just between us style. It said that he was a little too plundered lately, that he maybe wasn't handling the pressure well. She arrived before him at meetings, made a point of starting informal conversations with managers, and gradually undermined his image with subtle but constant comments. Repetition is a powerful weapon, and when you hear the same question over and over again from different people, it becomes true, even if it's a lie. The secret vote he discovered in the email was just the formalization of a decision that was already being built behind the scenes. The traitor had already convinced others that he was a liability, an out-of-the-box piece, someone who was destabilizing the team. And no one questioned it because he was smart. He planted doubts, not accusations. It created a climate of uncertainty, not conflict. And he did so without arousing suspicion. That's the scariest thing. Sabotage at work isn't always straightforward. Most of the time it comes like this, disguised as concern, camouflaged in good intentions. And the target only realizes when the damage has already been done, when his image has already been scratched, his credibility has been eroded, his space reduced. When you find yourself isolated, not knowing exactly what happened, but feeling like you've lost something. And he saw himself exactly like that, isolated, with the feeling that he had let something slip. And there really was, but not by carelessness, by trust. Because the greatest weakness of those who work with integrity is precisely to believe that everyone around them plays fair. And this is the mistake that many people make. Because in the workplace, unfortunately, not everyone is rooting for your success. In fact, the more you grow, the more you bother you. And he was growing, delivering results, standing out. He was praised by other sectors, called to give an opinion, involved in important decisions. And that bothers us. It bothers those who want to shine effortlessly. It bothers those who see their progress as a threat. And that's where the movement behind the scenes begins. A conversation here, a gossip there, a doubt planted where there was respect before. The manipulation began almost imperceptibly. The traitor knew exactly how to play. He began by suggesting that perhaps he was overworked, that perhaps he needed a strategic break so as not to get burned. All with that false empathy. And that was enough to trigger the alert in those who made decisions. Suddenly, they started taking him out of key meetings. They stopped including their name in decisive emails. Invitations to informal conversations are gone. But the worst was yet to come. He discovered that at times when he was absent, on sick leave for example, this colleague offered to take on tasks that were his. He did this voluntarily, saying that it was not to let it accumulate. And when he delivered, of course, he made a point of showing it to his superiors. It was the perfect chance to shine with other people's work and still reinforce the narrative that he was lost, disorganized, or too worn out to keep up the pace. With each step, the traitor dug a little deeper. Always with kindness, always with smiles, always with sweet words, but everything had a clear objective: to weaken, isolate, replace. It was a strategy of attrition, a silent plan of elimination. And why didn't he realize this before? Because no one wants to believe that they are being betrayed by someone so close. Because when sabotage comes from where you least expect it, it doesn't feel like sabotage. It seems like a coincidence. It seems like bad luck. It seems like your fault. And that's exactly where the power of the saboteur lies. He makes you doubt yourself before you doubt him. This is the pitfall that many people face in the workplace. The emotional distress caused by manipulative colleagues is enormous. The person begins to doubt their own performance, their own ability. He begins to be silent in meetings, to avoid proposing ideas, to accept less than you deserve, just so you don't seem confrontational, just so you don't create more friction. And little by little, it fades away. It is a cruel process, invisible. It is very common. Maybe you who are watching this video right now are living exactly that. Maybe you're feeling like something is wrong, but you can't put your finger on what it is. Maybe you think the problem is with you, and maybe someone close to you is manipulating everything without you realizing it. If you've experienced this or are experiencing something similar, comment below, "I felt this on my skin." Or if you want to be more direct, just comment, "I was sabotaged." It helps show that you're not alone. And it also helps this video reach more people who need to hear this story. And hold on, because what he did after discovering all this, articulation behind the curtains, will surprise you. Because he did not shut up, but it also did not descend to their level. And it is now that things really start to change. He did not make a scandal. He didn't yell. He didn't throw the email in anyone's face. He didn't go to the boss's office with an inflamed heart. The truth is, at that moment, he didn't feel anger. He felt exhaustion, the kind of tiredness that doesn't come from working too hard, but from realizing that the world you believed in doesn't exist as you imagined. And when that penny drops, you can't just turn it around. The instinct is not to shine brighter. It is to protect yourself, to be silent, to observe. He understood that it was not enough to be right. In the corporate game, the truth doesn't matter if you don't know how and when to use it, and sometimes it is not even good for anything. The system is not interested in justice. He is interested in keeping up appearances. So he chose to do what seemed most sensible, keep silent, but not passivity. In the following days, he said nothing about the email. He continued to go to the meetings, greeting the traitor with the same tone as always. He made a point of not changing anything in his expression, in his routine, in his behavior. He knew that if he showed imbalance, he would fall exactly into the trap that had been set for him. They would use any emotional reaction as proof that he was not well. That was what they expected. And that's exactly what he refused to deliver. But inside, something had changed. He began to see the environment for what it really was, an emotional minefield, where every word spoken can be turned into ammunition. And then he acted as if he were in a cold war. He started to document everything. He began to copy the manager in trivial emails, recording dates, speeches, changes in scope. I took screenshots of conversations, organized files in folders with dates. He knew that if the game was going to continue dirty, he would be able to defend himself. But more than registering, he began to act with a surgical distance. He stopped laughing at the group's jokes. He no longer engaged in side conversations. He limited himself to what was necessary. He didn't show resentment, but he didn't pretend intimacy either. His presence became a nuisance. His figure reminded the group of something they wanted to hide, and that made the looks change. He was no longer seen as part of the team, but they couldn't get it off so easy either. The traitor? He kept trying to keep his pose. He continued with the smiles, the jokes, the hallway chats, but something about him was different too. The lightness disappeared. It was as if he knew he had been discovered, but wasn't sure. As if he was trying to maintain control, but feeling that something had slipped through his hands. It was clear that tension was in the air, silent but present, the kind of tension that everyone pretends they don't notice, but feels all the time. He even considered confronting it. He even wrote a direct message. He thought about scheduling a formal conversation, but it blacked out. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood that nothing he said would change the essence of the other, that asking for an explanation would only be opening a loophole for more manipulation. And he didn't want to hear justifications. He did not want to understand both sides. He did not want to settle in peace. He wanted distance. He wanted, at the very least, to maintain the little sanity he still had. But the environment became unsustainable. Trust was destroyed, and not only with the traitor, but with the entire structure, because he realized that people knew, or at least they were suspicious. But no one said anything. Nobody warned you. No one intervened. And that hurt more than the betrayal itself. That's when he understood one of the hardest lessons about conflict at work. No one will save you. Basically, each one is trying to protect their own position. Alliances are fragile, ethics is malleable, and often collective silence is what sustains the toxic system. So he did what needed to be done. He began to look elsewhere, discreetly, not as an escape, but as survival. He updated his curriculum, reactivated old connections. He began to think about transition, and even with pain, even with the feeling of failure, even without having a guaranteed way out, he already felt that he was doing the right thing. because sometimes victory is coming out in one piece. It is not to unmask the traitor. It's not becoming the boss of the one who hurt you. It is not to appear as an example of overcoming. It's just leave without destroying yourself. Curiously, a short time later, the traitor began to be left aside. Some colleagues began to move away. A new manager has arrived. The masks didn't work so well with him anymore, and the guy who manipulated behind the scenes now became a mediocre employee. Without charisma, without ballast. This was not planned, it was not revenge, it was just time acting, and time has a habit of exposing what haste hides. He never had the satisfaction of seeing the other pay for what he did. There was never an apology. There has never been formal justice, but little by little he saw something more valuable happen. He recovered his own name, confidence itself, autonomy itself, and this, in environments where lies circulate freely, is a victory. If you were expecting an epic finale with cinematic twists and emotional speeches in team meetings, maybe this story will disappoint you. But if you know how things work in practice, where the fear of losing your job silences witnesses, where the ego commands decisions, where politics is worth more than the truth, then perhaps this is one of the most real stories you will hear about what it is, in fact, to turn the tables without getting your hands dirty. And if you've been through something like this, comment below. The truth doesn't need applause, or just write, "I saw everything, but I was silent." If you were ever that person who noticed an injustice and, out of fear, didn't say anything either, no one here will judge you. On the contrary, this space is precisely for those who have lived what almost no one has the courage to admit. And it doesn't come out now, because what he learned from all of this and how he rebuilt himself later will show you what it means to be respected, without having to play the same dirty game as those who wish you harm. After all that, he didn't come out the same, but it was not destroyed either. And this, for those who have been in the middle of a toxic environment, is a silent victory that only those who live know how much it costs. Because the hardest thing after a betrayal like this is not just moving on. The hardest thing is to trust any professional environment again. It's not carrying the trauma wherever you go. It is not allowing the poison of an experience to contaminate its entire trajectory. He carried marks, yes, but it also carried something that no corporate manual teaches, something that is not learned in leadership lectures. Instinct, that radar that develops after you've already been betrayed by those who swore to be by your side. That sixth sense that lights up when you feel like something is wrong, even if everyone around you is smiling. This instinct, this nose, became his main protection, and that's what he started to apply, and that now you need to listen carefully, because if there's one thing this whole story has taught him, and that can change the way you look at your own professional journey, it's that you can't afford to be naive at work. Not everyone there wants the best for you. Not everyone who praises you is rooting for you, and yes, it can hurt to accept that. But ignoring this reality hurts much more when the coup comes. The first lesson was, watch before you trust. Today, it doesn't open up right away. He does not share his plans with anyone. He doesn't talk about personal problems with colleagues just because they seem nice. He's learned that manipulative people know exactly what to ask to appear empathetic, but deep down, they're just collecting information that can be used against you later. So, he learned to be cordial, but not intimate, listening more than talking, and when he speaks, he chooses each word well. This simple change has already avoided several possible noises, misunderstandings, and distorted interpretations that previously fueled gossip behind the scenes. The second lesson, document everything. This may seem exaggerated, but it is not. In the corporate world, what is not registered simply does not exist. You may have said something brilliant in the meeting, but if you didn't send it by email afterwards, the credit goes to the person who repeated your idea, in other words, and of course, with their name in the signature. Hey Tyson, learn to use email as a shield. formalizing agreements, confirming decisions in writing. What's more, he learned to save these exchanges. Because when the pressure increases, even what was said clearly begins to be distorted by those who have an interest in changing the narrative. Having the history, in this case, is your defense. And perhaps the most powerful lesson has been, build a reputation that speaks for you. He understood that he could not control what others said, but he could control what he delivered. So it became even more professional, to be delivered before the deadline. Not promising what he couldn't deliver, to keep his composure even when provoked. And this created a valuable side effect. People began to trust his posture more than gossip about him. And over time, when someone tried to put their name to some intrigue, the automatic response was, "It doesn't match what I know of him." This is reputation, and a strong reputation in the workplace is like shielding. It protects you even when you are not present. But mind you, this does not mean that everything has become a bed of roses. He still encounters difficult colleagues, unprepared leaders, toxic environments. But now he knows how to recognize the signs long before the foul play begins. He notices when someone is trying to approach him too quickly, when a compliment comes disguised as manipulation, when someone starts speaking for him in meetings. And when he realizes this, he already changes the route. It already adjusts the communication. He already positions himself in a way that does not give a loophole. This is emotional intelligence applied to the real world. This is knowing how to survive without canceling oneself out. And do you know what was the most unexpected effect of all this? People started asking, how do you manage to stay so stable in the midst of so much tension? And the answer he learned in practice, it's not about being cold. It's about knowing where it's worth investing your energy. Because toxic people feed on your reaction. When you explode, you validate the narrative that you're unstable. When you try to justify everything, you give them more material to distort. But when you act strategically, with conscious silence, with firmness, without hysteria, you dismantle their game. And now it's up to you. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this video touched on something you've already experienced. Maybe you're going through it right now. Maybe you're surrounded by colleagues who smile at you in front of you, but root for you to stumble. Maybe you feel like you're being isolated little by little, losing space, losing voice. If so, I tell you, you're not crazy, and you're not alone. What you need from now on is to apply what you just heard. Start small. Review your latest conversations. Observe who is really with you and who is just approaching to observe your steps. Start positioning yourself, even if subtly. Strengthen your reputation. Create records, and above all, trust what you feel, because often the body perceives it before the mind. If you felt that this video helped you in any way, here's my invitation. Subscribe to the channel now. Here, you don't just find stories, you find strategies. Every week there is a new video to help you face and survive the conflicts that almost no one talks about, but that everyone lives in silence. And since you've reached the end, leave the like, not because of the algorithm, but because it shows me that there is someone on the other side who understood that this content matters. That needs to be talked about. That needs to reach more people. And if you really felt represented, comment below, "I know what it's like." Or, if you want to be more direct, you write, "This has happened to me." This simple comment helps twice. It shows me that this channel is fulfilling its role and helps those who come here to realize that they are not going through this alone. And now, if this video made sense to you, so you need to see the next one. It's popping up here on the screen right now. In it, I show you the hidden motive behind the sabotage, which leads someone to want to bring you down, even when you've never done anything against you. Spoiler: it has nothing to do with what you did, and everything to do with what you represent to these people. Click now and watch, because understanding the enemy is the first step to stop being a target. I'll see you there.